Hi, I'm Josh. I'm a member of the React team at Vercel. And today, Andrew and I are going to give you a sneak peek at some of the great features that are coming to you in the next major version of React. We're going to tell you about some improvements to server rendering and suspense that simplify some tricky coordination problems with HTML. We're going to cover some long-anticipated improvements to hydration. We're going to talk about a new core concept in React we call actions. And finally, we're going to give you an update on some welcome changes to JSX. All right, let's begin. The React team takes special interest in solving problems that require coordination across an application. But data loading and UI states aren't the only aspects of an application that can benefit from built-in coordination. During the past couple years, I spent a good bit of my time digging into the challenges of HTML document ordering to make declarative composable HTML possible. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's kind of silly. React already allows you to write composable HTML, and that's true, but it's for visual content. But HTML conveys document metadata, scripts, style sheets, and preloading hints for fonts, images, and more. Imagine an app where some routes render articles. Our article component is a great place or a natural place to put page-specific information, both the visual article content, but also things like the page title and the styles that are specific to the article's visual representation. But consider where these elements will end up in your HTML document if you were to actually render them like this. They're almost certainly not going to be where you want them to. The title is document metadata. That belongs in the head. The style sheet is deep within the document, and the browser can't start downloading it as early as it could, and will likely paint before loading the style sheet, and you'll end up with a visual bug called flash of unstyled content. This seemingly simple task of fully utilizing HTML from within a component isn't so straightforward. So let's see how we might solve it today. One sign of a good component is whether you can understand, one sign of good composition is whether you can understand a component's behavior without having to consider all of the other components in your application. We call this concept local reasoning. We can preserve local reasoning by using useEffect or portals directly inside our article component to insert these tags into the document. But now we've lost these critical pieces of information in our server render. This is even worse than before because bots and other technologies that don't run client-side JavaScript are going to completely miss the title. And the style sheet's loaded even later, so the browser won't be able to discover it until React has hydrated. Really, the only viable path forward is to split our component up. We need our HTML to look like this, with our title and style sheet server rendered and in the document head. So we can provide these tags to the component responsible for rendering the head. But now we have another problem. You have to figure out how to get article-specific information into one of the most generic components in our entire application. We've thrown local reasoning out the window, and we have a complex coordination problem to solve. And whether you solve this problem yourself in your app or you use a library to handle it for you, this coordination is tricky to get right. So what would it look like if we had a React-powered solution for this problem? We started with the premise that this composition of HTML, this composing of HTML was ideal for component composition. And we also said that this was ideal for our document composition. So in React 19, we set out to make it possible for you to have both. Solving document metadata isn't that complicated. Title tags, title tags, links, meta, they're typically only in the head anyways, and so we can just kind of ensure they're positioned there when server rendering. And we just need to make sure that hydration can find them, even if they're not sort of inside the component where it would normally look. But style sheets are a bit more challenging. Style sheets are sensitive to their relative order because later style sheets override earlier ones when style rules conflict. For this, we need a little help from you. In React 19, if you tell React about the precedence of a style sheet, React will insert it into the document head, ordered relative to the other style sheets with a defined precedence. In this example, I have a list component, which renders a style sheet with the precedence that I chose to call default. precedence is loosely modeled on CSS layers, where later values define higher importance. So now, when I render a style sheet in my article component with a precedence value of high, React will insert it after the style sheet found in my list. But now imagine I have a carousel component which renders a style sheet with the original precedence default. React ensures that this style sheet is ordered alongside other style sheets with default precedence, even if it was discovered much later in the render. With precedence, React can safely reorder the style sheets to optimize their loading performance, but we still need one more thing to make these really composable. React understands that each style sheet needs to only be loaded once. So even if you have different components that all depend on the same style resource, or you render the same component multiple times, you won't end up with unwanted duplication. But relative order is only one part of the problem with style sheets. Earlier, I mentioned that browsers wait until all the style sheets in the head have loaded before doing the initial paint. This is a critical feature for browsers because it prevents pages from rendering unstyled content or flashing unstyled content on the initial load. But React isn't just about loading initial documents. With server streaming rendering, it might discover a style sheet late, long after the head tag has already been sent to the browser. And on the client, React can discover new style sheets on any update. If React is going to provide a useful capability with style sheets, we can't let flash of unstyled content bugs ruin the experience. So when you use the precedence prop, React will also ensure the style sheet is loaded before revealing the content of the nearest suspense boundary. You can think of this feature as suspense for CSS. Suspense for CSS works across server components, streaming server rendering, and the client, so you can confidently render your style sheets inside the components that depend on them. React 19 also adds support for hoisting and deduplicating async scripts, another HTML feature that has historically been hard to compose within components. And it also has support for preloads and other kinds of browser hints, with new APIs that can be used both during render and during user events like hover and click. Now, I can probably guess that many of you don't include these kinds of HTML tags or features directly into the components you write for your applications. And that makes sense. These features have historically been very hard to coordinate, and it often took the power of a dedicated library or a bundler to make this feasible. And that's okay. We expect the earliest adopters of these new features to be libraries and bundlers that can remove significant complexity from their implementations. But we hope over time folks will experiment with using these features directly in their applications now that React has made it possible to actually compose them nicely. You can find more information about React's HTML coordination features in our docs at react.dev. And if you want to learn more about how these features work, check out my talk this afternoon where I go into more detail about the problem and how we chose to solve it. Okay, before I wrap up, I want to share a quick update on hydration. In React 18, we launched a new selective hydration feature. And with this, React can hydrate parts of your application and prioritize components that have user interaction like click events. However, as part of this release, hydration warnings became more prominent and were often frustrating to debug. Well, in React 19, we made two key improvements to hydration. First, React will now make extra DOM nodes in the body and the head. React will be more tolerant of extra DOM nodes in the body and the head, which will improve compatibility with third-party scripts and browser extensions. Thank you. I don't want to ruin the enthusiasm, but hydration errors are still going to happen, unfortunately. And for that, we've made some serious improvements to how we report these errors. Before, when a hydration error occurred, your console repeated the error multiple times, and the necessary information to debug the root cause was hard to find and often not very useful. Now, in React 19, hydration errors are consolidated into a single error report, and most crucially, they contain a diff of the props and the elements that are different. Now, look at this. All right, I hope you're as excited for these new features as I am. Here's Andrew to tell you more about actions and JSX. Thank you.